Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is Thursday, April 9th, and welcome to Coffee with Ken. I'm Ken Biberaj, a managing director at Savills, a leading tenant advisory commercial real estate firm. And we are coming to the end of week 4 of social distancing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, it was announced that 16 million Americans have filed for unemployment in the last 3 weeks alone. Today's topic is America Will Save America, Leadership During the Coronavirus Pandemic. And I am so excited to welcome Anne Marie Slaughter, former Director of Policy Planning at the State Department and current CEO of New America. Great to see you. I am here at Swings Coffee Shop at 14th and G, right down the street from New America. How are you?
I'm good. I'm sort of between coffee time and happy hour.
I didn't tell you what was in the coffee cup, Anne Marie. I mean, it's after like 20 Zoom calls a day, right?
I mean, the happy hour is starting to get earlier after Zoom for hours.
Amazing. Well, look, it's so great to connect. We know your time's valuable. We're so grateful you're here. It was very exciting the other week to catch your op-ed in the New York Times, and that was kind of the genesis of what we hope to make the conversation today. And it really reminded me of a line from President Clinton's inaugural address in 1992, where he said, "There's nothing wrong with America that can't be fixed by what is right with America." So how can America save America today?
Well, I do believe that as a patriot, but also a change maker, I have to say. Because there's quite a lot wrong at the moment, but I think amid all the news of the rising cases, the rising deaths, the miscommunications, what other countries are doing, there's a lot that the federal government could be doing and could be doing better. But it may not make sense to focus all our attention there. If you look at what governors are doing, I have Governor Murphy in New Jersey, Governor Newsom, Governor Cuomo, Mike DeWine in Ohio, Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan. These are leaders together with mayors and frankly CEOs and scientists who are kind of tapping into that decentralized authority and spirit of innovation and civic volunteering. And there's a huge amount of activity going on that is making a difference.
Yeah, I mean, it really strikes me if you look across the board, how the private sector is stepping up, the nonprofit sector, state and local leaders. It's really kind of testing. I mean, what are you seeing in general as you look at leadership today, right? When you're looking at the landscape, private sector, public sector, domestic, international, what kind of lessons are you seeing that need to be scaled, right? I'm sure you're monitoring and seeing all these things from the crisis today, but also in your long career, kind of watching these things on a global basis. I mean, what leadership lessons are you kind of, think people should focus on?
So I think there are a couple, but the first one is definitely the ask for forgiveness, not permission, right? Because this is a moment where if you hang back and wait, right, for somebody to tell you what to do, people's lives are on the lines. And the really effective leaders have said, this is what it looks like. I'm going to tell my people to stay in or lock people down, whether or not other people have done that. Or I'm going to see if we can't support our workers or our healthcare workers. And so it's definitely a moment to take initiative and get out there and do what you can. But that then means you've got coordination problems because people are doing things. So the second big lesson is leave your ego at home. Right? There are we need to be able to work together. This is no moment for, I'm going to be captain of my boat, I'm going to defend my turf. There has to also be this spirit of collaboration. Let's see how we can do this together, even if we're quite different or we have different approaches.
So how has this changed your personal approach at New America, right? You're constantly putting out thought leadership and keeping an eye on the latest trends and kind of looking what can be disrupted. How has this kind of moment maybe, either created a moment to highlight certain activities or efforts you're pursuing? How are you all kind of addressing this right now? What do you think the focus should be?
So we are on the one hand looking at the huge unemployment numbers and the number of kids who are out of school, who don't have internet, who are really being left behind. And we're saying, this is the system was strained and now it's cracking wide open in lots of places, and we need to think about how we can actively help folks. And a lot of our people are working either on the stimulus package or working with colleges or working with state governments. At the same time, this crisis is a time machine to the future, right? A lot of what we've been predicting, like education going online, well, a lot of universities said, we can't do that. Yep, turns out they and, you know, lots of arguments about needing paid family leave and paid sick leave and better child care. You're seeing what happens right now if you don't have those things, right? If you don't give people paid sick leave and they've got, you know, something's going to infect you, that's not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. So we're really looking at where are the opportunities to try to use the crisis as a catalyst to make the kind of changes we need to make to be more resilient, effectively more effective, and really more caring as a society.
Yeah, no, I love that line in your op-ed, and it struck me for a moment there when you talk about this being a time machine of the future. It just made me reflect and pull up your old Atlantic article, Why Women Still Can't Have It All from 2012, and that almost seemed like a time machine of the future. How do you kind of, you know, pick that back up and think about today? I mean, how impactful to kind of have basically everybody at home kind of understanding the challenges of, like, is this actually work-life balance? Can you actually get anything done? I mean, have you spent any time, I mean, we're all in fast motion, but have you thought back about some of those lessons and what you put in that article? And
I definitely have. One thing, a number of, well, so there are two different ways that I think that was really right. One is exactly as you suggested. Parents, particularly fathers, who are now home and having to homeschool their kids and work out of the house and figure out how to balance everything, are suddenly saying, whoa, in the first place, this is really hard. You know, let's pay teachers a whole lot more. So there's that, where we're starting to value care much, much more. The other, though, is CEOs and managers who are suddenly saying, hey, you know, you can work from home. And my colleague Bridget Schulte had a piece in the New York Times this week where she said, you know, women like us have been saying to managers, you can do this. Let me work from home and I can figure out I can get that flexibility that allows me to make it happen. And a lot of managers were, nope, you know, it's FaceTime that matters. We're going to see some positive change there, where suddenly men and women are going to start saying, maybe there's a different balance between work at home and work in the office.
Yeah, and with my 2 postgraduate degrees, I'm not qualified to do more beyond cafeteria person or gym. I mean, it is proving invaluable what our educators do every single day and just the challenges involved there. So that's a testament. One of the things that in a previous conversation we had with Joe Stiglitz, he highlighted the trust vacuum as being one of the real problems today in terms of a recovery and getting out of this, right? Like, if we don't have trust in science, trust in education and media and government, how do you actually respond? I mean, what are your thoughts on that and how we kind of need to be able to come together in a moment like this and need to be able to rely on our authorities and our leaders?
You know, so on the good side, I think a lot of the people who have been most skeptical of experts have had to come around to the view, you know, this virus is not something you can wish away, and it's something where the experts really do have something to tell us, and those states that follow their advice are going to have better results than those that don't. At the same time, a lot of this work has to be done locally and in cities. That trust gap means that you've got to reweave the fabric of communities to say, hey, look, we together have got to be able to come back to work. We've got to have a system where we will trust that people who are infected will not come out, and people who are out, who are once again getting the economy going, have been tested or have had the virus and have the antibodies. And that's very hard to do at the national level. So I do think a lot of the testing and the tracking and the gradual coming back online or offline and into the streets, actually, as it happens, will have to be done much more at a local level, maybe county by county.
Interesting. Okay. We briefly mentioned kind of the shining the light on some deeper rooted issues and challenges in our country. I think really just like the digital divide, access to technology. I was happy to see Dr. Fauci actually acknowledge this for the African American community, just like the disparity and who's getting affected and how it's spreading. Have you guys paid close attention to this? I mean, is this one of the areas where hopefully, as we think about a recovery, more attention will be provided and given to communities in need across this country that are really kind of not in a position to recover themselves?
Yeah, well, I think so. New America has been running a series on how COVID is affecting the African American community, just Indianapolis, just one city. But it's very important that we're actually collecting this information and paying attention to it, because in often previously, there's sort of these are the statistics, and the norm is assumed to be, a white middle class person, whereas it isn't a norm. There's tremendous disparities and there are tremendous differences. That's equally true on how well kids are adapting to being out of school, right? If you've got good internet, if you've got a house where you can have a room where you can be online with your teacher, you're going to have different educational results than if you don't have those things. So I do think this crisis and the ways in which it is showing us not just that some have and some have less, but that some have not at all. Some are truly unable to have the same health outcomes, educational outcomes. It's staring us in the face, but it's also a chance to do things like get, affordable broadband across the country, which would make a huge difference, and to start keeping those statistics that would help us really start focusing on how you change those differences.
Sure. So when you looked at the $2 trillion relief, not really even stimulus, right, that passed, talk today, obviously, what's going to happen. Obviously, the Senate's looking to do a small business relief. The Speaker has different ideas. What kind of measures do you think we need to kind of, prioritize in the next 30, 45 days at the federal level? Obviously, we talked about the decentralized kind of leadership, but from Washington, that's where the real resources are. What does Washington need to do in the next 45 days?
Well, the single biggest thing they need to do is to keep track of how much of that money actually gets through. So we are seeing with unemployment insurance and then the stimulus, the loans, the number of people who aren't going to get that money, possibly for months, because if you're filing for income tax, you're supposed to get it. But of course, the people who need it most are the people who don't file for income tax. So and we're also seeing, like, the Small Businesses Administration is completely overwhelmed. So the thing that Congress needs to do here is not just focus on allocating and passing the bill. It's tracking, is this money getting to the people who need it in the time they need it? Otherwise, it's a stimulus on paper, but it's not really helping the people who need it most. And it won't restart our economy unless it actually gets to those people.
Yeah, and it seems like even efforts to talk about like infrastructure, like those projects take so long, and that's not going to be immediate relief, right? But it's
no, people need money in their pockets, and you can do it. There was something in the Times today in Berlin. They managed to get checks of over $1,000 to 15,000 small business artists and others overnight. We're supposed to be the technological leaders in the world. We have the tech that can do this. We can do it quickly, but government's got to focus on the delivery, not just the authorization.
So one of the things that strikes me, and I feel like you're the perfect person to kind of, analyze this a little bit, is you see places like Denmark, they froze the economy. Everyone's kind of doing different things. New Zealand has been fantastic. Putting your State Department hat on, running policy planning, thinking about the global economy. This is a virus that doesn't matter where your borders are. I mean, it passes and you're asymptomatic. You don't know if you have it or not. I mean, this really requires a global response, right? I mean, there's just so many levels of this. How should the federal government approach this? How should the global community approach this? I mean, how do we prepare for, like, once we recover, it not kind of rebounding happening again, just slingshotting around and catching us all off guard?
Well, this is one where the G20 is hugely important. It should be. I was truly disappointed that, President Trump blocked a coordinated G20 response over finger pointing at China. This is where in 2008, Barack Obama and Xi Jinping and the other key leaders in the G20, it's not perfect, but it's more states than the UN Security Council, really coordinated responses. Banks coordinated responses, stimulus, all sorts of ways where, again, the markets are just like the virus, right? There's this contagion. And as this virus goes to countries with much less well-developed healthcare systems, that just guarantees that it keeps going round and round. Or else we shut down all travel until there's a vaccine, which we really cannot do. So there must be a global response. Should be led by the G20. I think that if the State Department and the federal government won't play the role that we have traditionally played in the world, then we need governors and philanthropists and CEOs, all the people who can make a difference. It's not optimal, but it would be better than the United States not playing that role.
Yeah. Looking back domestically, you've spent a lot of time talking about the future of work, the gig economy, just like how we operate technology. Talk a little bit about that. What kind of work has New America been doing related to the future of work, and then how does this impact the kind of future of the future of work?
You know, it's interesting. On the one hand, I look at this and I think we are finally seeing the people we call essential workers. We're making them visible. You know, I have many degrees. I'm overeducated, but I am not an essential worker, right? You know, I am not delivering food or medicine or heat or to people. And so I hope we come out of this with a greater appreciation of the essential workers. But I think what is happening that's even bigger than that is the collapse of retail. We knew it was collapsing. It was moving online, but we thought we had a 5 to 10 year runway, maybe 5 years to reskill those workers. And similarly, lots of the people who've lost their jobs a fair number of those jobs won't be replaced. I mean, obviously in the restaurant sector, et cetera, you're not going to automate those, but there are others that are. And so one of the things we have to do out of this crisis is reskilling, upskilling, right? There are many jobs being created, but they require different skills. So we need to do reskilling much faster. And frankly, a certain amount of reshoring, because one of the things that this crisis is showing us too, we can't afford to depend on global supply chains for everything. And frankly, it would be safer and probably more vibrant in a number of areas, not to end global business. I'm not suggesting that, but to have the protection of more local and regional supply chains as well. So
yeah. Oh, that's interesting. One of the things that came up of a previous conversation we had this week was the potential delay in innovation related to testing out of Colombia. We were talking to Cyrus Masumi from ZocDoc, and he made this very interesting policy point that it's taking a little bit longer because they have to get patents on everything they create before they distribute it, because people may take the innovation, patent it themselves, and monetize it, and then box them out and actually make it harder to distribute. Have you seen some of these kind of policy, regulatory hurdles that are delaying or slowing this down? I mean, have you seen things like that popping up?
So, yes, and there are liability questions. I mean, the whole question of what pharmaceuticals get developed and don't, and where it makes sense to put your resources are often a function of policy in terms of not giving drug companies the right incentives. In this case, this is a good example of where you need national policy to remove roadblocks to allow, private innovation, public innovation going forward. So it's a good example of where you really need some national leadership, but not necessarily to do, just to create space to do. I will say though that I've been here, I was talking to someone, a very distinguished biomedical investor, who said that a lot of the drug companies have come together on their own to collaborate in ways you wouldn't normally expect, just because they recognize that these are extraordinary circumstances. So it's people might be willing to suspend normal competition.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I want to remind everybody listening, we have a Q&A box at the bottom. So if you have any questions, you can submit them through that, and we'll try to squeeze them in before time runs out. We don't know when this is going to kind of hit a peak, right? I think today we're hearing, maybe June, maybe July. But you mentioned restaurants as an example. It's not going to be like a restaurant's going to be packed on day one. This is going to be probably you can only go halfway or this, and that slow kind of incremental. And for margin businesses, do you have any thoughts on how this recovery plays out with the potential of another breakout or anything like that? I mean, it just seems so uncertain.
It is. I mean, the one thing I think is as we're building what I think of as networks of resilience, those are going to be increasingly important if there's another wave, and there's likely to be multiple waves, at least one in the fall. So it's likely we'll kind of venture back out and start returning to some version of normal. It will not be fully normal, and then we may well have to pull back. Mm-hmm. I think, though, the ideal is going to be a sort of phased return to normal. I mean, funny, as somebody over 60 living with people in my family who are particularly vulnerable, I'm thinking I might never get to go out again. But younger people, people who don't have any underlying conditions, people who've had it, people who test negative, we're going to have to create the space for people to kind of try the water again, right? And gradually ramp back up as people realize, well, I went out to the restaurant, I came back, we're still testing. But it's going to be phased. There's no we're all going to just suddenly go back into a restaurant or bar.
Yeah, it's one of these things. We've heard some companies talk about having almost like two teams, where it'd be like one team works for half the day and then goes home, and then the next team kind of settles in and so on. As we look at the broader impact, obviously, to Americans across the board, financial, job security, et cetera. But when you look at the educational institutions and the foundations and the food banks, if people don't have resources to contribute, I mean, the trickle down impact on some of these organizations is going to be, I think, pretty devastating, right? I mean, how do you think, as someone who leads an impactful organization who's probably more important than ever, and someone who's leading a nonprofit that's probably more important than ever, what's the kind of call to action to try to get support or keep people focused on those needs that are out there as well?
So I think they're double. One, there's no question that, everyone who doesn't have big financial reserves, and that's most of us in the nonprofit sector for sure, many individuals, we're going to need help, and it's going to take private and public together. So I think donations to food banks have never been more important, although it's scary because many of us who, people of means, but you're worried about how much food your family's going to have. Still, this is the moment to feel like we're in this together. We have to do everything we can to help and look for where you can help locally. At the same time, this is where you write your member of Congress, your state, local, federal government, because ultimately charity is not going to feed the number of people who need to be fed, right? This is why we have the government. This is why we pay our taxes. So it is both. It is to look to what you can do individually in your community, but at the same time to make your voice and vote heard. That we need the government, right? I mean, if you go back to Hoover and Roosevelt and the Great Depression, it really took big government action. And this is the most dramatic crisis, certainly of my lifetime, because it's a health crisis and an economic crisis and a global crisis all at the same time.
Unbelievable. When the dust settles, we have a question here. What will be the impact on the current international order? How do these international institutions exist or accommodate moving forward after this?
That's such a good question. I'm writing an article on it. The organization that Bono runs that to fight global poverty has actually, they've got a great paper on their website, and they've called for a new Bretton Woods agreement. And I think we're going to need something like that. The post-1945 organizations have been under strain for a long time, because I always say it's not realistic to think the world's going to be run in 2045 by the victors of World War II. But we're not quite clear what's replacing it. I think it's going to be a blend of those traditional organizations being reinvented, and then new organizations that represent different states, but also, again, global actors. I mean, you've got corporations that are far bigger than most of the countries of the world. You have philanthropies, you have groups. So we need to find a global order that taps all that power and initiative, as well as states. But I think it's going to take some real imagination to get there.
Got it. So we try to keep these pretty positive as well, right? I mean, this is such a scary and uncertain time. What potential silver linings do you see emerging out of this, whether it's a policy, issue, just in general? I mean, do you see anything?
No, I totally do. I'll tell you one, as we talked about this, but Americans need to value care, the work of care. And again, that's not just taking care of kids and older people. That's education, that's coaching, that's investing in other people, ministry, therapy, all the ways we care for each other. And I do think this crisis is making that work much more visible. I think we will get to an infrastructure of care, whether it's childcare and family leave, paying teachers more, all of that. I also think education it has to move online, not completely, because you need physical too. But I think this is going to trigger the overhaul of our higher education and our K through 12 systems in ways that we need and that we can do.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about it a little bit in your op-ed, but I mean, this care economy, and what I find so interesting is I've been having a lot of calls with really talented people, great friends who, have had layoffs in the last couple of weeks because of companies they've worked for, very innovative. There's just this kind of talent pool that is now coming onto the sidelines and at home, and having a lot of time to reflect and think. And so I think it's very important to hear from people like you. What do you think the next kind of horizon of innovation might be? And obviously, whether it's healthcare or just care in general, strikes at the heart of that.
And I think it's national broadband. I really do.
Yeah.
I think you cannot realize there'll be other crises. There'll be other pandemics, climate change, with the kind of natural disasters. And this crisis is going to make us realize what we have to build to be resilient in the face of a whole bunch of global threats, from pandemics to climate problems to cybersecurity. A lot of the resilience we have to build is the same. And I think this crisis is, again, the catalyst for that.
Yeah, I agree. One last question we have here was related to the performance of some of our institutions, the World Health Organization, CDC, NIH. You've seen a lot of these entities in action. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think the World Health Organization has done a good job. There's always politics there, and it's hard. Yeah. It probably could have been faster off the mark, and certainly our national institutions should have been much faster off the mark. But Anthony Fauci is a national treasure, and I really do think there are lots of local and state health authorities that have done a really good job. Again, this will probably convince us we need to be investing more in those institutions and listening to them more in the future.
Yeah. We'll do one last question from a second-year grad student at Columbia. He wants to know, with the rising unemployment, what should students that are looking into an uncertain job market be focused on?
Yeah.
Save the big one for.
It is an uncertain time. Again, I think there are, in some ways, you're looking at jobs that are being created, and they're a lot of the shift to just an online economy where a lot of things are being delivered, like telemedicine, and there's a whole lot of support for that kind of an economy. I would also say this is a good time to think about care jobs of the future.
Yeah.
Teaching of all different kinds, coaching, The number of people who are kind of doing that kind of service, and again online, that may get paid less, but it may be a job that actually you have a better quality of life with, and it can be more resilient.
Oh, it's fantastic. Well, look, we know you have so much on your plate. We're very grateful that you joined us today for Coffee with Ken. I'm thrilled, and I just want to let folks listening in know that next Monday, April 13th at 10 a.m., we'll have John King, former Secretary of Education and current CEO of the Education Trust, joining us. And in the words of Andrew Cuomo, stay home, stop the spread, save lives. And Reed, thank you so much. It's great to see you. Stay safe.
Ken, thanks so much. I enjoyed it.
Have a great one. Take care.
Bye.